This episode is all about carnivore and the impacts on cortisol, as well as what happens during the transition to menopause, or if you're in the pre-menopausal phase, and if cortisol is acting up. Is carnivore the right diet for you? I now eat a lot of meat, and so do they. If you want to thrive, you need to eat meat. Meat is required. Today, I really wanted to talk about the conversations that have been going around in the community about carnivore causing a total impact on cortisol, how that then impacts your insulin levels, not eating enough carbs causing insulin resistance, making your A1C go up, blood sugar go up, causing you to have all the issues that you had prior to carnivore, and how carnivore, therefore, is not an ideal diet long term. And so in this conversation, we are going to talk about all of these things, including the menopause aspect, because it really is impacted by your adrenal function and your cortisol output. So it's all connected. What I really want to talk about in this conversation is what really happens in your body, and is carnivore too much of a demand on cortisol, which then wrecks your overall health. I want to make sure that you understand that any association does not mean causation. Attribution does not mean causation. So if I am eating strict carnivore and then all of a sudden I don't feel good, it is not always about the diet. We practice holistic health, functional medicine in our practice. So we see everything: toxins, mineral imbalances, gut imbalances, environmental toxins, stress, the mind body stuff. All of that impacts our body. Our bodies are smarter than just that it's a carb or no carb thing. I also know that many of you listen to this on audio, and so I highly recommend for this one to watch it on video, just because I'm going to go through a lot of slides, and oftentimes images and infographics help paint the picture and help you understand a lot of the science, the evidence base behind what I'm sharing. So I highly recommend coming on video. In our practice, we always focus on root cause healing, and this is a very simplified version of what that means. Super simply, we have these external factors from our environment that can include environmental allergens, subclinical pathogens, synthetic toxins, food reactants, and biotoxins. And then we have our internal self, which is the neurotransmitters, our immune system, autoimmunity, hormones, genetics. The goal of root cause healing is for us to strengthen this internal self as best as possible. And one way we can support the external environment is by reducing our toxic burden in the body. We call this the toxin bucket, and it's a lot of things. Everybody's bucket is different. Your bucket can be flimsier, your bucket could be bigger, but if you start having the bucket overflow, that's when you will feel symptoms. And so the goal is to not have this bucket overflow, but secondly, it's to make the bucket robust. And I think of the bucket being your immune system, and the immune system is mostly in your gut. Now, these are some of the most prevalent causes of chronic inflammation, and it is said that chronic inflammation is the root cause or the underlying factor of all modern day illnesses: autoimmune, heart disease, blood sugar imbalance. And so the goal is to reduce this inflammation. So if we know that one source of inflammation is insulin resistance and advanced glycation end products from elevated blood sugar, then one just common sense fact is that maybe we should reduce our blood sugars, which we try to do by doing a carnivore diet. This graphic shares the rise and fall of blood sugar. So the normal blood sugar ranges is between 80 to 120 milligrams per deciliter. And when you eat food, your blood sugar goes up, which is a normal response. And then insulin comes and then it goes back down. You might have lower energy if you're not able to tap into your energy stores. And then you'll feel low energy. So you'll drink coffee to stimulate a cortisol response, or you'll have sugar and then your blood sugar will go up. You'll feel that sugar spike or that stimulant. And you'll have that going on every single day, times 3, if not more, and then times the rest of your life or however long you eat this way. It's fine if you eat this way occasionally, but the issue is that if you understand just common sense, your body has 5 liters of blood at any given time. So if you do the math of 80 to 120 milligrams per deciliter, that's about 4 grams of sugar in the blood at any given time. That's like 1 teaspoon of sugar in the blood. So everything else has to get removed from your bloodstream because then the sugar becomes too high and bad things can happen. And then even if it gets too low, bad things can happen. So what happens to this normal response when you're eating 200 grams per meal or 300 grams or 350 grams or 400 grams a day? This response is being used way more than is common. And if you're only supposed to have 4 grams or 1 teaspoon or about 1 teaspoon of sugar in your blood, what happens when you're eating so much sugar all the time? A long time ago, we didn't really eat a lot of sugar. So in the 1800s, the average person had maybe one medium banana. In 2009, we're having the equivalent at about 8 medium bananas or about 219 grams per day. And a lot of people actually consume more than 200 grams of carbohydrates per day. All macros impact insulin. But if you eat carbohydrates, it increases your blood sugar within half an hour to an hour, and it goes up. Insulin comes and then it drops down. Protein makes it go up about 2 to 4 hours later, and 50% can convert to glucose. And then there's fat. It will also stimulate an insulin response. It just might be later. So you can see that many hours later, it will still have an insulin response. But you can see that carbohydrates have the highest insulin response, and we do not care about blood sugar as much as we care about what the insulin is doing. And so if we have hyperinsulinemia or insulin resistance, where the blood is not getting rid of the sugar anymore, that's when metabolic disease and inflammation ensues. We have this emergency mechanism down here where if your blood sugar is not being balanced anymore by insulin, cortisol will come and help save the day by if your blood sugar goes too low, which happens to so many people that have blood sugar dysregulation in the middle of the night, they will wake up and it's because their blood sugar was dropping too low. So cortisol comes to save the day and now they're wide awake. They think they need to go to the bathroom. But in reality, it's because cortisol came, which is a fight or flight hormone, and it's trying to re-regulate that blood sugar to be balanced in this 80 to 120 milligrams. So again, if you are eating a bunch of carbs, you're taxing the system a lot more than should be necessary. So imagine if you're eating carbs versus if you're eating protein and if you're eating fat. So the big conversation in the carnivore space is that I ate carnivore and now my blood sugar, my fasting glucose, or my A1C, which is the average of 3 months, but it's actually the average of the last 6 weeks of my blood sugar, is higher than before, or it's worse than before when I was eating like a paleo diet. Now, I believe it was Dr. Saives that brought up this whole issue. If you stay carnivore long term, the issue is that you will become insulin resistant. It's like this opposite issue because of glucagon. The data came from his patients, and he said A1C went up, blood glucose went up. They weren't feeling as well. Their insulin was too low. And so I asked him to show me the data because we actually don't see that in our practice. When people are eating sufficiently, their insulin never gets below 1.8. And if it does, it's oftentimes because they're under eating. And if you watch my other video on under eating, you'll see like what I mean by under eating. Our practice, where we've run thousands of labs as well, we don't see what you're seeing. I also wanted to bring up this thing about A1C. The context really matters. So if you have a continuous glucose monitor, it may be more beneficial than just saying, oh my gosh, my A1C is 6.5. It's better to see what the highs and lows are throughout the day to see, is your blood sugar pretty regulated? And if it's pretty regulated, then you know that insulin's not being really tapped. And so what is the bigger concern? I'm not saying 6.5 is good. This is just an example I found as I was quickly putting this presentation together. But if you're at 5.6, if you're pretty much stable in your blood sugar, is that A1C going to really matter? The other thing I brought up in another video, and I'll put it in the show notes about glucose going up, is the dolphin studies on adaptive insulin resistance. So dolphins are mostly carnivore, and there are periods when they're strict carnivore and eating zero carbs, their blood sugar starts to go up. And it's because the muscles are purposely taking up less glucose so that it could be used for the very few areas that need sugar in your body. So when you eat meat and you're digesting and your blood sugar kind of goes up, as you saw in that one image, instead of your muscles taking it up, your liver taking it up as it normally does when you're eating a carbohydrate rich diet, the muscles will purposely keep more of the sugar in your blood or the glucose so that then you could use it for very small parts of the brain, for red blood cells, and a few other places that need glucose. And so it's a natural adaptive response that our bodies beautifully do when we are not eating as many carbs. Now, context really matters here. If your insulin is going up and your blood sugar is going up and your NMR panel or your cholesterol levels look wonky, like your triglycerides are above 100 milligrams per deciliter, your antibodies aren't improving, there are ways to determine, is that A1C score okay on a carnivore diet, or is it actually moving and telling us there are imbalances that we need to look further into? Now, one thing you have to know about the carnivore diet is the beautiful or bad thing about the carnivore diet is once you remove the noise of plants, of processed foods, of many different things, your immune system can now surveil and do the job it's supposed to do outside of looking at every single food that's coming in. So as your body is healing, your gut's healing, and you're now only eating meat, it will notice or it will let you know when other things are imbalanced. This is how people will notice that they have an imbalance in electrolytes, for example. Maybe that electrolyte imbalance was always there, but when you consume glucose, there's also water molecules that are surrounding the glucose, so you don't notice the electrolyte imbalance. But when you eat carnivore, you can't hide that anymore. It's not that carnivore caused the electrolyte imbalance. That electrolyte balance was always there. And prove me wrong, but test your antidiuretic hormone, your vasopressin, and oftentimes that will reveal the true root cause of many electrolyte imbalances that won't balance on a carnivore diet, no matter what you do. I do want to touch upon fruits and vegetables and whole foods and whole vegetables. I know that is the biggest argument that Paul Saladino brought up many moons ago, but that is a paleo diet just removing nuts. I mean, honestly, people have tried the paleo diet, have eaten mostly meat with some healthy whole foods and fruits and vegetables, and yet they still often have thyroid imbalances, hormone issues. Many of those people end up finding keto and then carnivore. So we've already tried this diet. Many of the fruits we have today are man-made. They have been hybridized and bred to purposely be sweeter. So when we say, oh, it is natural to be eating watermelons or bananas or carrots, it is not the same that we've had. I think personally, the main reason carnivore has so many benefits is it reduces overall systemic inflammation. You could test it with your CRP. You could test it with IL-6. It reduces your blood sugar imbalances, even though some people see their A1C go up. It is that adaptive insulin response. If you look at the dolphins, they have the same mechanism occurring in their bodies. They don't have any of the issues of someone that really has blood sugar imbalances. They have vibrant health. And then as soon as they add carbs, their blood sugar normalizes. And that's what a lot of humans do right now. When the carnivore diet is not working enough, they add back carbs, say, oh, I feel better. Well, yeah, carbohydrates are a stimulant. And then their blood sugar goes down. Well, yeah, your muscles are now saying, oh, there's an influx of sugar. So now we need to hurry up and put it into our liver, our muscles, and our fat tissues. Very normal response. So please don't just chase A1Cs. Now, carnivore also improves insulin resistance. A lot of this stuff will matter as we talk about hormones. It also provides the most nutrient-dense raw materials. The important thought in that is if you have gut imbalances and you're having a hard time even breaking down and absorbing nutrients, meats have the most bioavailable nutrition. Even with poor gut function, you have the best chance of absorbing nutrients to make that toxin bucket as robust as possible, to make your immune system as robust as possible. So I redid this graphic to show the sources of inflammation, but from a carnivore diet perspective. And I won't go through all of them, but you can pause this part of the video and see how carnivore supports every single part of these chronic inflammatory triggers. As an example, for excess stress, if you reduce blood sugar dysregulation, you help manage that cortisol and blood sugar balance. you might be able to support your stress levels better because now the cortisol that might have been there to help balance your blood sugar no longer needs to be used here. And then now you can use cortisol to balance your stressors. So by now, if you've been following a carnivore diet or curious of it, you've heard of anti-nutrients, you've heard of plant toxins, gluten is a big one, oxalates, lectins, phytates, and all of these are really just a plant having a little bit of toxicity that they use to protect themselves and also their offspring. One of the biggest issues of plant toxins is that they bind to minerals, and this really comes into play. And another reason plants are not ideal is if you think about the toxin bucket, all plants, including organic ones, use a lot of toxins. We already know a lot about the toxins of glyphosate, atrazine, but organic pest control are not safe either. Just because arsenic is natural does not mean it's good for us. If you see pounds per acre, we use so much more of the organic variety, and the organic variety is much less regulated. You could see that for every pound per acre sprayed of glyphosate, it's about 1.9. But for sulfur, for example, it's 9 pounds per acre. I will touch on just a couple of the plant toxins. So phytic acid is in whole grains, legumes, seeds, and nuts. And the biggest concern is that phytic acid decreases the absorption of iron, zinc, magnesium, copper, phosphorus, and calcium. So if you were to eat oatmeal with your meat, you will be reducing the absorption of the iron you need as well as the zinc. And you need zinc for stomach acid, for immune function. And so that's where these phytic acid, even if it's whole foods, becomes an issue, especially if you're nutrient deficient. And we will touch on minerals very shortly because it absolutely is impacting our hormones. Oxalates are another one. Oxalates binds to calcium and iron, impacts our digestion because there's also enzyme inhibitors. So if we're eating whole food spinach or whole food almonds, is it impacting our gut function? And then also, what about our calcium and iron stores? We need sufficient iron to have the red blood cells move oxygen around in our body. That gives us energy. That gives us vibrancy. So now that we've had that discussion about what causes inflammation, cortisol, how blood sugar imbalances can cause our cortisol to go wonky, and now there's this discussion that carnivore causes us to really tap into cortisol. And so therefore, long-term, carnivore is not ideal because it's so cortisol driven. The endocrine system is one system. So think about the cardiovascular system is obviously like the heart, the blood vessels. The endocrine system is our hormonal system. Basically, the function of hormones is to communicate with one another for things to be released and not, and for things to function properly. And so our endocrine system is this image right here. The duodenum, which is our gut health, actually impacts our overall endocrine system. You see our pituitary, which is in our brain. Remember, the pituitary is part of how TSH gets released and then commands the T3, T4 to be released. That's how thyroid is impacted. That's how adrenals are impacted. And that's how our sex organs are impacted. And if you think about every single thing in our body requires nutrition, requires raw materials to function. So for your thyroid to function, many of you know now you need protein or tyrosine, and then you also need iodine. You also need selenium and other cofactors, but that is how thyroid works its best, assuming there's no other confounding factors. Every endocrine organ, so every organ in your hormone system, requires a mineral to function ideally. So as you guys know, the thyroid really depends on iodine, the prostate zinc. So if you're eating phytates, there goes some of your zinc too. Your pituitary requires manganese, and a lot of these are in your meats and your seafood. So every endocrine organ requires specific minerals to be there in abundance so that they can function. And you don't want to just throw in a ton of minerals because minerals also counteract each other. For example, zinc and copper are antagonistic. They work against each other. So you can't just say, okay, I'll take a ton of zinc or I'll take a ton of copper. Ideally, you get the natural balance in foods. And then in addition to that, your hormones require solid protein and sufficient fat. Where this comes into play especially is if we add plants, there is a risk of phytates affecting your zinc. Coming back to this graphic, In the endocrine system, we have the section on adrenals. And in the adrenals, one pathway the adrenals are responsible for is the hormone or the sex hormone pathway. So cholesterol is really required for all of the sex hormone pathway to function. Yes, a lot of the cholesterol is produced in the body, but imagine if you're stressed and so you require more cortisol, or your blood sugar is dysregulated, you need more cortisol. And so cortisol's here, and then you see the sex hormones down here. This is all happening from the adrenals. I want you to understand the endocrine cascade. And again, a lot of these graphics are in the Carnivore Cure, but the endocrine cascade often starts with sugar imbalances and then cascades down. And a lot of that endocrine system gets imbalanced by stress, by environmental toxins, toxins in our home and beauty care, our poor diet, poor digestion, mineral deficiencies. Here we go again with minerals. Essential fatty acid deficiency. This is why I'm a big fan of consuming fish and shellfish, especially oysters, and then dehydration. So the way that this looks is, so afternoon, you feel a drop in energy. So you reach for the coffee or you reach for the donut. So you get that quick fix and you feel a little bit better. But now you're tapping into your adrenals, which is the cortisol, because it's not balancing well enough. And so now at night, you might be waking up in the middle of the night because your blood sugar gets too low. And so your adrenals help by releasing cortisol. And now it's impacting your pituitary, which is in your brain, which then impacts your thyroid because now your pituitary is busy with this adrenal cortisol imbalance. And now the system is not able to balance your thyroid as well. And so the TSH, T4 releases are getting wonky. Then it impacts your thyroid. And then overarching, your adrenals then impact your sex hormones. We just talked about how sex hormones are supported by the adrenals. Well, so are your mineral corticoids as well as your glucocorticoids. So this is how basically your adrenals support blood sugar imbalances and then makes cortisol. Your mineral corticoids also support your sodium, potassium balance, the electrolytes in your system. And then that's why one way you could test that is aldosterone. And then again, your sex hormones. So if your adrenals get impacted by blood sugar, your body will prioritize this over all of these other two. So now let's look at the chronic stress response. Pregnenolone is a grandmother hormone, and it will decide based on your body's needs if it needs to produce more progesterone, if it needs to produce aldosterone. It'll decide if it'll make DHEA or estrone, and it'll also decide if it goes to cortisol. Now, if you're highly stressed, most of the pregnenolone, it will have to prioritize going to cortisol. If your blood sugar is imbalanced, it will go to cortisol. If you're highly stressed and you need more cortisol, it will go to cortisol. And I believe that this argument is the main reason why people are saying that carnivore overly taps into cortisol and therefore we must add carbs. But if you remember here, stress, toxins, poor diet, poor digestion, mineral deficiencies, essential fatty acid deficiencies, dehydration. I mean, working out causes your cortisol to go up. Overly fasting causes your cortisol to go up. Undereating causes your cortisol to go up because it is the stress hormone that allows you to survive another day. If so many factors affect cortisol, and I highly challenge you to look up online what can make cortisol go up or what affects cortisol a lot. There are many things that impact cortisol, but why is the question only that it's carnivore that causes cortisol too much to be tapped into? What about not undereating? It is the number one thing we see in our practice. We've had many women with amenorrhea or loss of period, and by not undereating, they get their period back and on a carnivore diet. And if it was that much of a stressor on their body, the body would never get their period back, never let them get pregnant, because the stress of having another baby, of having fertility, is a stress on the body. And it will only allow you to do that if you're healthy enough. And yet we have had people in our practice get their period back, get pregnant on a carnivore diet, when supposedly carnivore is so taxing or highly cortisol driven that it's not ideal for you long term. And that may be true if you are undereating, you're undereating fat, and you're not eating overall sufficient calories. I see too much of the protein sparing modified fast, the eat a lot and then fast for multiple days, dry fast, water fast. All of these things are signals that you are telling your body to be dependent on cortisol. And if you use these things, a lot of these are great tools. Even cold water plunges are also cortisol driven. That's why people feel great after. You're releasing all of these stress hormones. But nuance matters. It depends on where you are in your journey, how much you're healing, and are you just trying to survive off cortisol? And if you are plus doing a carnivore diet of under eating, cold plunges, over fasting, not eating enough, overworking out, then absolutely those things will cause your cortisol to be depleting you of hormones, of vibrancy. But that's not a carnivore diet. That's a individualized protocol that is not ideal, that may be hyper focusing on being lean, being muscular, and not focusing on longevity. So now let's talk about getting into menopause, because this is such a big question I get so often in our client population. It is absolutely true that your estrogen and progesterone goes down as we age. That is a natural, normal response. Stress equals cortisol also can reduce your progesterone levels. And then all of this will impact your abilities to smoothly get into menopause. If you notice, not everyone goes through a hard menopause. And why is that? If not everybody goes through it, then maybe that's not a norm. It is natural for our hormones to decline. Ultimately, it is up to you if you want to use bioidentical hormones. A lot of people feel great on it, but I always think it's really important to consider the root causes before you get on it. Because if you think my hormones are dropping and that's why, therefore, I don't feel good and that's why I need to get on them, but that is a natural response. Your hormones will drop. In menopause, that transition, what ends up happening is your estrogen and progesterone are mostly produced by your ovaries. And then when your body's like, I'm done making babies, once the reproductive system is about to retire, the ovaries are basically say, I'm done. The rest of the endocrine system, you guys now need to take over producing the remaining hormones. Yes, in much less doses, but it produces hormones. And if you have not taxed your endocrine system, your adrenal system, your whole life, you will have the highest chance of going through menopause much more easier. And so let's look at some of the factors. Not every woman experiences menopause the same way. The difference is how well the body's backup systems, which is the adrenals, thyroid, liver, and your body fat status, steps in to support hormone balance once the ovaries slow down. When the backup systems are nourished and stress is well managed, the transition is gentler and more stable. And this table shares the key players that influence all of that. So the first area is adrenal function. The adrenals do not produce as much estrogen and androgens as your ovaries used to. But during menopause, the adrenals become the body's backup hormone producers. They make DHEA, and then they make other precursor hormones that basically convert to estrogens and androgens or testosterone and DHEA in your tissues. So by the way, if you use a urine test or a Dutch test, blood labs, or a saliva test, all of those are measuring what's circulating in your system. But once you hit menopause, most of the hormones are made in your tissues, which you cannot test for. So again, if you are testing those markers, are you testing it to get on bioidenticals? Chronic stress will lower DHEA and shift more of the resources towards cortisol, so that cortisol steal, prioritizing cortisol instead of creating the help for this new transition to produce DHEA and these other precursor hormones. So if you are stressed, you are eating a poor diet, you have bad digestion, you have mineral deficiencies, essential fatty acid, all of these things that are already impacting cortisol, then your chance of when you get into menopause for your adrenals to now also take on, hey, I will also take on using DHEA and these other precursor hormones to produce the hormones that now the ovaries are no longer going to produce, that will not happen smoothly. And so what happens is you will start to feel menopausal symptoms such as brain fog, moodiness, hot flashes, fatigue. All of that comes during that transition. Cholesterol supply is another big one. The steroid hormones, pregnenolone, DHEA, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, they all require cholesterol. If you are not eating enough, if you are eating poor quality fats, if you are under eating, over fasting, malnutrition, eating a high protein version of carnivore and low or moderate fat, that will impact your cholesterol supply. And then here's the big kicker. There is an enzyme in our fat called aromatase. And if you are too low in fat, you will not have enough estrone to produce those precursor hormones in your tissues to support you as you move into menopause. If you have too much fat, that will impact your insulin resistance and then cause inflammation. So you want to have at least 20 to 28% of body fat, because that will then support your fat tissues to convert adrenal hormones into estrogen through, again, your body fat. So if you've been under eating, and you are very thin, and it's not a weight that your body wants to be, but that you force it to be by hyper focusing on weight loss, exercise, and all the other hacks that make you thin, there is a higher chance you're going to have a hard time getting into menopause. Other factors, liver detoxification. Your liver helps to clear a lot of the estrogen waste products. And so if you are overly fasting, you're not going to have a bowel movement. Through your bile, which gets stimulated when you eat fat, if you eat enough, you will have bowel movements and it will clear a lot of the waste products of hormones. So if your liver isn't functioning, if you drink a lot of alcohol, if your blood sugar is imbalanced, these things all impact your liver. If your liver is not functioning well and you're not having a lot of bowel movements, it will impact your hormone status. Mitochondrial and thyroid support. If you're not eating sufficiently, if you're not even checking iodine, if you're restricting your calories, it's going to impact you during this transition to menopause. Your progesterone balance needs to also be supported. Over the years, did you support your nervous system? Did you support your sleep? And then inflammation and insulin sensitivity also impacts. So keeping your blood sugar and inflammation balanced, so your adrenals don't have to focus on having cortisol be produced to save the day. And then long term, it will impact your ability to produce hormones from the same adrenal gland. And then other factors is bone and muscle preservation by strength training, protecting your bones and your muscle mass, eating sufficient meat, eating sufficient protein will support that area, especially when estrogen is falling. Again, a lot of the hormones now are being produced and used in your tissues directly after menopause. And then finally, the stress balance, using mind body. A lot of this supports the body not getting stressed out. If you have not taken care of your body, if you have not focused on root cause healing and wellness and making sure that you're not just trying to be thin, that focus on wellness will then allow you to have the easiest transition to menopause. Just like a cortisol impact or you're starting to feel fatigue isn't a carnivore versus not carnivore thing, or carbs versus not carnivore thing, getting into menopause is not a, is it a hormone or not hormone thing? Your hormones absolutely drop during menopause. And if that's a natural response, why are we changing that just because we don't feel better? What if it's all the other precursors that we are missing? And how much of those are we missing in our modern life that then impacts our ability to get into menopause smoothly? And we just think it's, oh, I just am deficient in a hormone. And to be really candid, a lot of the people that are proponents of adding carbohydrates do use other things. And so I just want the conversation, if we are saying that carnivore is not ideal and we need carbs, but these people, I think some of them are using BHRTs and are using other medications to support things that they may not be addressing that are root cause issues. So if the adrenal function, your cholesterol supply, the aromatase, so you don't have enough body fat, and then all of these, the liver, the mitochondria, the thyroid, the inflammation, insulin sensitivity, your bone mass, your stress levels, your toxin bucket is full. And then you go get a Dutch test or a lab test that shows, yep, your hormones are low. That's why I'm feeling bad. But hormones are a sign that something more root cause is imbalanced. And this is why root cause matters so much. I know it's not the easiest path, but if you don't cover all of these things, if you don't cover all of these things, if you don't cover all of these things, you will have the effects as you get older. So you can get on BHRTs, you can add carbs, and those will be great band-aids for a while. But eventually you may need more BHRTs, you may need more carbs, or you may need more stimulants to feel the way you do today, just adding them back. We have seen enough illness in our practice that we have never been in a situation where we say, oh, it's just carbs. That's the reason you're sick. That's the reason your thyroid isn't working. That's the reason your hormones. Sure, some people prefer to add carbs. No problem with that. I'm totally supportive if you want to add foods to a carnivore diet, because I don't think you have to do it long term. I think you can still have ideal health, even adding a few carbs here and there. You just have to know your tolerance. You just have to know your sensitivities. But to say you have to add carbs back because of hormones, because of cortisol, that is an association. There are some people that feel if they add a little bit of bulk with fiber or adding some plants, they will have a better chance of having a bowel movement. And we're supportive of that because we want people to have more bowel movements. That'll reduce some of the toxins in their body. That'll allow them to remove some of the estrogen metabolites. So I'm supportive of that. But if you're going to eat carbs to reduce your blood sugar, it's because your body's moving it around. Don't chase a number. And that's why you should add carbohydrates. If you're not feeling well, really consider all of the factors that I brought up that stimulate cortisol. Don't even believe me. Go search on Google right now, what affects cortisol? And you will see it's everything. And for us to reduce the conversation to it's a carb or no carb thing, it's really doing a disservice to the community. If we're saying that our hormones or our thyroid is impacted because of this diet, well, yeah, if you're probably undereating or undereating fat, you probably are. We've worked with enough people that this is not my N=1 data. I don't want people to feel that they have to eat carbs out of fear, because that is not in the science. It's not even how the adrenals function. Generally, I like using meats to have nutritional repletion, reduce inflammation so the body can start healing and the bucket can become as robust as possible. And in our practice, we will use supplements for gut supports to help with digestive enzymes, to produce more hydrochloric acid, maybe use some probiotics or immunoglobulins to strengthen the immune system. But beyond that, we really want people to eat the meats that will give them the raw nutrients. So for ribeye, you see there's all these B vitamins, and then there's a robust amount of selenium. Look at the iron and the zinc. Now imagine that you're eating plants with this meat. That percentage of your daily value is going to go down. It is in the science that plants will reduce the level of absorption of your minerals. I love pork because of the vitamin B1. There is so many benefits of thiamine. There is no other food that has as much thiamine as pork. And again, this is why I love the rainbow of meats. It also has an abundance of niacin. Salmon is rich in minerals. It also has a level of vitamin C. You cannot get this much omega-3 from any type of beef. Oysters are amazing with minerals. And again, if you want healthy hormones, minerals are a must. Remember, manganese, as an example, is really beneficial for your pituitary. So I just want to leave a couple things as we're wrapping up. Excess cortisol output is not simply a carb versus no carb issue. I hope that this video shows you all the reasons why cortisol can be used, what impacts cortisol, what nutrients are required to produce cortisol, and all of that interplays. And do you really think it's a carb versus no carb thing? Because the paleo diet has already proved that it doesn't always work by just adding a few whole carbs. Blood sugar dysregulation is a big cortisol output than no carbs alone. If you were to weigh cortisol demand from carnivore versus cortisol demand by having blood sugar dysregulation, the blood sugar dysregulation is a bigger stress on cortisol. Now, if you're, again, eating carnivore and undereating fat, then absolutely that will impact your cortisol levels. But that is not a carnivore versus non-carnivore thing. And I would love to see evidence. So if you show me your labs, your symptoms by adding carbs and carbs alone, so not including exogenous hormone use, because that is a band-aid with the carbs, and that is not a fair comparison to somebody just doing carnivore. I'd love to see the evidence, and I'd love to see the evidence from Dr. Saibes. Hormones post-menopause will work if everything has been balanced thus far. Your body has a scorecard, and if you've treated your body well the whole time before menopause, you will most likely transition into menopause smoothly. And if you haven't treated it well, if you haven't been supporting your adrenal function, then it will have a hard time. And if you're thin or too thin, the effects of menopause are going to be worse, and you may even enter into early menopause. Again, this is not a carnivore versus not carnivore thing or a carb versus not carb thing. It's a lot deeper than that. For some people, carnivore will put you into a physiologic insulin resistant state. That is not real insulin resistance. It's just your muscles, your liver will take up less sugar in the blood so that it's more available to some very small parts of the brain and then to red blood cells and other areas. It's a normal adaptive response when there's not carbs. Your body's protecting you and letting you thrive. The examples of many dolphin studies show that these dolphins have vibrant health. There's no symptoms of blood sugar dysregulation. Carnivore gives you the best raw nutrients to combat toxins, heal the body, and make your toxin bucket as robust as possible. Imagine if you're deficient in minerals and now you're eating plants with your meat, you will be even reducing your mineral status more and then impacting your hormones even more. Or imagine that your blood sugar is dysregulated, not as much because of the carbs or not that you're eating, but because your stress levels or you're impacted by environmental toxins, such as mold, such as other things that you're eating, even glyphosate that's on our plants or atrazine in our waters that are from our plants. The truth is our modern life impacts our cortisol levels a lot. So we need to do the best we can. And the best way we can move forward is by making sure we have enough fat, making sure we're eating the most bioavailable nutrients, even if our gut is messed up. If we eat meat, most of those nutrients you saw on the nutrition facts of meat will get absorbed and utilized. And then you could start healing. You will have less assaults to the body and the immune system, and you'll have less overall inflammation. And ideally, you could walk into menopause much more smoothly. And if you're not even near menopause and you're having cortisol issues and fatigue and electrolyte issues on this way of eating, be honest if you're eating enough and if you're eating sufficient fat, because that is one of the biggest culprits we see where people aren't healing enough in our practice. And then beyond that, if you are eating enough, it still is not a carb versus not carb thing. Oftentimes, there's other environmental illness. If you want to transition as best as possible into menopause, you have to support your adrenals and your thyroid and your gut. And all of that is basically a well-oiled orchestra. And that's your hormone, your endocrine system. And if that has not been functioning well before menopause, you're going to feel it even more once you move into menopause. And that reduction of hormones is not why you're feeling bad. It's because that process of now shifting over to your adrenals is not functioning as well. Just taking BHRTs can be a band-aid. But you also have to really consider, did I really meet all the root cause issues? Is the fears and concerns around carnivore really valid? Is it really a carbs versus no carbs conversation? And if somebody's eating 300 grams of carbohydrates a day, that blood sugar, insulin, adrenals, cortisol coming in is eventually going to happen. Over time, when you run a system too much and then add stress, add all the modern day stressors we have, that area will absolutely get impacted. And if your solution right now is to add carbs and then add BHRTs or hormones, what's going to happen in 20 years when you've not covered the root cause stuff? I hope that you will take your labs, track your symptoms, be honest with what you're eating and how you're eating, and if you're eating sufficiently, and ideally even the rainbow of meats, and then see where you are. And sometimes it's really just better to turn off social media. A lot of the noise gets into our heads, plants seeds, and this makes us doubt. And that doubt, again, is priming your nervous system to release more cortisol. All right, guys, I hope that this was helpful. Make sure to eat a lot of meat. Take care of your bodies because it is the only place you have to live. I will talk to you later. Bye, guys.